Welcome to the deep dive. We're digging into some really eye-opening source material today, stuff you sent us, about something huge for America, but maybe kind of invisible, our link to the oceans.
Yeah, it's what these sources are calling a silent crisis.
Yeah.
This deep decline in U.S. maritime strength and what that actually means. It touches everything.
Right, so our mission here is simple. Unpack these sources, pull out the really critical insights, how we ended up here and what this silent crisis really means for you.
It really hits home. You think about that old quote from Themistocles. He who commands the sea has command of everything. Still rings true, I think.
Command of everything. That's pretty intense, especially when, 80% of global trade still moves by sea.
80%. And almost 90% of U.S. military supplies in a conflict scenario. We rely on the sea massively.
But the shocker, the core thing these sources hammer home, is that even with that reliance, America's actual command, our grip on the seas, has just faded.
Yeah.
Dramatically.
Faded is putting it mildly. Some of these numbers suggest more of a collapse, especially compared to where the U.S. used to be. And it starts with shipbuilding, or, well, the lack of it.
Okay, let's get right into those numbers, because they are, frankly, pretty stunning. Where does the U.S. stand today in building big commercial ships?
Globally. It's almost a rounding error. The figure that really stands out is just 0.1%. 0.1% of large commercial vessels worldwide are built here.
0.1. So like one ship in 1,000, if that.
Pretty much. And you compare that to China, they're building roughly 60% of all the new orders globally. 60%.
So 60 versus 0.1, okay.
But the capacity difference is even more stark. The sources state China's shipbuilding capacity is 232 times greater than the U.S.
Wait, say that again, 232 times?
Yeah, 232 times. It's not a gap, as one source says. It's a chasm.
That's unbelievable. And there was that one comparison that just floored me. A single Chinese company.
Right. One Chinese shipbuilder built more commercial tonnage just in 2024 than the entire U.S. shipbuilding industry has built since the end of World War II.
Since 1945. One company, 1 year, versus our entire industry for almost 80 years.
It really drives home the scale of the decline, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Our remaining big yards, they mostly survive on complex Navy contracts. They're just not in the global commercial game.
So, okay, we're clearly not building the ships. Who's actually running the ships that carry all our stuff, our imports and exports?
Overwhelmingly, it's foreign companies. Foreign-built ships, foreign-owned, foreign-crewed. That's how most U.S. trade moves.
And these aren't just lots of different foreign companies, are there? There's concentration happening.
Huge concentration. By the end of this year, 2024, you're looking at 9 giant foreign carriers, mostly European and Asian, consolidating into just 3 dominant alliances or cartels.
3 groups.
3 groups controlling about 90% of all the container shipping coming into and out of the U.S.
90%. That's incredible leverage over our economy.
Exactly. They can pretty much dictate the terms, the prices, for moving almost all our manufactured goods. And we saw exactly what that leverage means not too long ago.
And the vulnerabilities don't stop at the ships, right? They reach right into our ports. The sources mentioned something about a Trojan horse.
Yeah, this is where it gets into critical infrastructure security. About 80% of those huge ship-to-shore cranes, the ones lifting containers, they're made by one company, ZPMC, a Chinese state-owned enterprise.
ZPMC, okay. And the Trojan horse concern is?
It's that the equipment could potentially be exploited, maybe for intelligence gathering, tracking cargo, or even, disruption in a crisis. The sources cite evidence pointing to these possibilities.
And the contracts for these cranes often don't even block unauthorized access. That seems like a basic security oversight.
It's a major vulnerability highlighted in the material. And it's not just the cranes. China also dominates the supply of truck chassis needed to move containers from the ports, about 86%. And the containers themselves, around 95%.
So ships, shipping lines, cranes, chassis, containers, it's across the entire maritime supply chain.
Pervasive foreign dominance, much of it linked to China. And that has really significant strategic implications way beyond just the cost of shipping.
Okay, that's a truly stark picture of where we are. Let's talk about the consequences. What does this lack of control, this vulnerability actually mean for people listening, for the economy?
Well, the pandemic gave us a brutal, real-world demonstration. Remember the chaos? Ships backed up, shelves empty, shipping costs going through the roof.
Oh, yeah. Impossible to forget. Trying to get anything delivered felt like a lottery, and it cost a fortune.
Exactly. And these sources draw a direct line from that foreign cartel control to the chaos. They use their market power to jack up spot contract prices on some routes by up to 1,000%.
1,000%. 10 times the cost.
10 times. And the profits they pulled in were just astronomical.
Yeah.
U.S. $364 billion in net income across 2021 and 2022. About $223 billion just in 2022 alone. That shows the sheer economic power they wield.
And it wasn't just making imports expensive, right? I remember reading about U.S. exports getting stranded, especially farmers.
Yeah, that's one of the most infuriating parts. These foreign carriers needing to get containers back to Asia for the next load of profitable imports would often refuse to load U.S. agricultural exports.
So American products, maybe perishable stuff, just sat there on the docks because it wasn't profitable enough for the foreign lines to take them.
That's exactly what the sources describe. They prioritize speed back to Asia over serving U.S. exporters. The value lost was huge, hundreds of millions. $632 million in just 2 months in late 2020, $1.1 billion over 5 months later that year.
A direct hit to American businesses.
Absolutely. And it ripples out, It damages our reputation as a reliable supplier, potentially losing markets permanently. It weakens our whole supply chain resilience, even touches on food security. The sources use strong language here. This economic leverage could be weaponized.
Weaponized economic leverage. That definitely sticks with you. And we should remember the maritime industry itself, even diminished, is still a big piece of the U.S. economy.
It really is. Direct contribution is about $311 billion in GDP, supporting 2.5 million direct jobs based on 2024 data. The total impact, including ripple effects, is massive, maybe close to $2.9 trillion in GDP and over 21 million jobs, using slightly older data. And there's huge planned investment, like $163 billion in ports through 2025. The potential is there.
So the economic stakes are enormous. But this decline isn't just economic. The sources tie it directly to national security, to military readiness.
And the connection is, maybe surprisingly, very direct. Fewer U.S. commercial ships means fewer trained American civilian sailors, mariners.
Why are civilian mariners so critical for the military?
They're the ones who crew the Navy support fleet. The military Sea Lift Command ships the tankers, the cargo ships, the logistics backbone that keeps the warships supplied, fueled, and equipped around the world. And there's a critical shortage. So critical, in fact, that the Navy confirmed just last November 2024, they'd have to actually lay up 17 of these vital support vessels. Some of them recently delivered.
Laying up ships, not because they're old, but because there aren't enough people to sail them.
Exactly. They simply lack the crews. Military Sea Lift Command needs about 4,500 billets filled, but the total pool of available mariners is only around $4,500. That's not enough for full crewing, let alone a surge in a crisis. An estimate from 2017 put the shortage at over 1,800 qualified mariners, and it's probably worse now.
Okay, that's the people problem. What about the ships themselves, particularly for something like fuel?
That's where the numbers get even more alarming, especially thinking about a potential conflict in the Pacific. Vast distances, huge fuel needs.
Right.
The sources estimate the military would need over 100 fuel tankers for that kind of scenario.
Over 100. And we have
Access to maybe 15? 15.
15 when you need over 100. That's not a gap, that's a void.
It's a huge deficit. U.S. Transportation Command, Transcom, back in 2016, identified a need for 86 tankers just for global ops. Today, the Department of Defense only has about 8 readily available. The overall logistics force for the Pacific is maybe only at 60% of what's required.
And closing that big fuel depot in Hawaii, Red Hill, only makes the tanker shortage worse, right? More trips needed.
Exactly. It exacerbates the problem significantly. Bottom line, these shortages directly impact the military's ability to operate, to sustain itself, especially far from home. It really brings home what Eisenhower said about logistics winning or losing wars.
And circling back quickly to the ports, those ZPMC cranes aren't just an economic risk, they're framed as a direct national security threat. Cyber vulnerabilities and critical infrastructure.
Absolutely. Potential disruption, potential spying. Combined with the lack of ships and crews, it paints a picture of extreme vulnerability in a crisis. You might not have the ships, and your own ports could be compromised.
It's a deeply worrying, interconnected web of problems. How on earth do we get here? The sources are clear this wasn't just bad luck, it was policy choices over decades.
That's the core of the historical analysis. It goes back to the early 20th century. Initially, you had what they called ruinous competition among shipping lines, slashing rates, driving each other out of business, total instability.
So they formed cartels to stabilize things?
Yes, but these were unregulated cartels. They fixed prices, sure, but they also used their power to discriminate, hurting smaller shippers or certain ports. At the same time, the U.S. government wasn't really investing in shipbuilding, while other countries like Britain were heavily subsidizing theirs. The result: by 1901, U.S. flagships carried only 8% of our own trade.
So that pattern market instability leading to foreign dominance was set early on.
It was. And it blew up when World War I started in 1914. European nations pulled their ships for war efforts. Suddenly, the U.S., dependent on those ships, saw freight rates soar 20 times. Goods piled up, imports dried up. It choked the economy. A preview, really, of the pandemic supply shocks, but much worse.
But the reaction to WWI was strong, right?
Yeah.
A huge push in shipbuilding.
An incredible response. It proved the U.S. could do it. Congress poured money into building ships and shipyards. Over 2,300 ships for WWI, over 5,500 for WWII. Think Liberty ships built in days. We became the world's shipbuilder.
But they learned just building ships wasn't the whole answer.
That was the critical lesson. They realized you needed market rules too. So Congress created the U.S. Shipping Board, later the Federal Maritime Commission, FMC, to regulate the industry almost like a public utility. Cartels had to get government approval, prove they served the public interest, and price discrimination was banned. It was strategic oversight.
Which sounds completely different from the direction things took later. When did that regulatory approach get dismantled?
The big shift really began in the 1980s, under the Reagan administration. The philosophy changed towards deregulation, viewing the FMC as red tape. The argument was efficiency, letting the free market work.
And the result of taking the reins off.
Well, the sources show it led right back to that destructive price competition. Containerization made it worse. Huge ships needing to be filled led to deep discounting. Profits were squeezed.
And that triggered mergers.
Exactly. Deregulation, especially the 1984 Shipping Act, which actually expanded antitrust immunity for carriers, paved the way for massive consolidation. You saw 7 major carrier acquisitions in the 7 years after that act versus just 1 in the 17 years before.
So deregulation actively helped foreign companies consolidate power.
It did. U.S. flag carriers with higher costs like union wages couldn't compete in the rate wars, especially as subsidies were withdrawn. This led to famous American lines like American Present Lines and Sealand being bought by foreign competitors in the late 90s. Meanwhile, Asian shipyards were getting massive state subsidies.
Now, you can't talk about U.S. maritime policy without bringing up the Jones Act. How does that fit into this picture?
Right. The Jones Act from 1920. It says ships moving goods between U.S. ports must be U.S. built, U.S. owned, and U.S. crewed. The stated goal was always national security, maintain a fleet, mariners, and shipbuilding capability for defense.
So proponents see it as vital for defense, keeping that domestic capability alive?
Yes, they argue it provides essential sea lift capacity, train mariners for wartime, supports homeland security, and they argue there's no solid proof it dramatically hikes overall consumer costs, though specific areas like Hawaii see impacts.
But critics, especially economists, have a very different take.
A sharply different take. They argue it significantly raises domestic shipping costs because U.S.-built ships are so expensive, maybe 4 times the world price. They say it stifles competition, results in an older domestic fleet, and crucially has actually failed in its national security objectives.
Failed? How so?
Their argument is that because the Build American requirement makes ships so costly, very few are built, particularly the kinds needed for international trade and military support. So the act creates a small, expensive, protected domestic niche, but doesn't deliver the scale of shipbuilding or the number of mariners needed for major global military logistics. They point out the military itself often relies on foreign-built ships for global operations because the Jones Act only covers domestic routes.
So the sources paint the Jones Act as this paradox meant for security, but its economic effects might actually undermine the broader security goals by shrinking the overall industrial base and mariner pool. It's complex.
Okay. Very complex. And it suggests that just tweaking or repealing this one law isn't the silver bullet for the much larger systemic crisis.
Given this whole history, this decline, rebuilding seems critical. What do the sources suggest as a path forward, a new course?
They argue very strongly that we need a comprehensive strategic approach, not just tinkering around the edges. Current ideas like tariffs on Chinese cranes or small shipyard tax breaks are called helpful, but ultimately too simplistic and small bore.
Why too simplistic?
Because they don't address the root causes laid bare by the history. The abandonment of that regulated competition model and the lack of sustained strategic public investment. The sense is that policymakers might not be seeing the full systemic picture.
So what's the proposed comprehensive strategy look like then?
It's really three core pillars, drawing from that history. First, restore a robust version of regulated competition. Get the government back in the game, guiding carrier alliances to ensure fair pricing and service for U.S. shippers, preventing those wild swings and abuses. Treat it like the essential public utility it is.
Okay, market rules. What's the second pillar?
Combine those rules with robust public investment. Serious money flowing into shipping, shipbuilding, modernizing ports, and critically training mariners. This is framed as both leveling the playing field against subsidized foreign competitors and as a direct national security need. It aligns with recent calls from the White House and Navy to rebuild the industrial base.
And the third part was strategic interdependence.
Right. Basically, be smarter about globalization. Build secure supply chains and economic ties with allies, not potential adversaries. It's about finding a balance. You can't be totally self-sufficient maybe, but relying on rivals for your core logistics is just too dangerous.
So weaving trade and commerce into national strategy, not treating them as separate things.
Exactly. The sources stress that in a world where economic leverage becomes a geopolitical weapon, the U.S. has to actively shape global trade and secure its own lifelines. It can't afford to be passive or vulnerable.
It feels like such a vital issue, but like we said, often overlooked. The sources underscore this isn't some new fringe idea, bringing in quotes from historical figures.
Absolutely. You've got Alfred Thayer Mahan, the classic naval theorist, saying a merchant marine is vital for prosperity and the Navy exists to protect it.
Then FDR, calling the merchant marine essential for national welfare, even crucially decisive as a free people. Powerful words.
And right up to today, Admiral James DeVritis talking about maritime connectivity being key to influence beyond just warships, and J.P. Springett II calling this decline maybe the greatest existential challenge since the Cold War, making recovery an urgent imperative.
That consistency across eras, across viewpoints, it really hammers home that this is a foundational, nonpartisan issue about national strength that we've somehow let slide.
It's about the underlying plumbing of global power and prosperity, not just the warships on the surface.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the sources paint a really alarming picture.